Far more than we think. Making Sense of Spirituality by Angelo. Chapter 49. The Other Half. My track record on romantic relationships does not really qualify me to say much at all on this subject. What I can say is that my attitude toward relationships has completely changed as a result of my spiritual journey. There are so many paradoxes in spirituality, and the different thinking that arises on the subject of relationships is one of the biggest. Many people dream of finding their perfect partner for life and settling down together to live happily ever after. This is the stuff of fairy tales that infiltrates all forms of art and culture throughout the world. The vision of finding the ideal soulmate who will bring us fulfillment, happiness and completeness is our obsession. We assume that they will somehow compensate for all of our internal insecurities and weaknesses. Once the dreamlike experience of the honeymoon period is over, and we settle down to the routines of life, we often begin to wonder if perhaps this really was the right person after all, and whether there might be someone more suitable. This restlessness is evidenced by the ever-increasing divorce rate. Yet many of us jump straight back in and make the same mistakes all over again. If aliens were observing us from afar, they would surely wonder what on earth we are up to. We cause each other so much pain and misery via relationships that it ought to be obvious that perhaps we're getting it wrong. Yet we look at the old couple who have been married for 50 years or more and assume they must be happy, and we want the same. I've no doubt that loving and happy long-term relationships are perfectly possible, but perhaps not on the basis we might have previously thought. The word that sums up the minefield of romantic relationships is codependence. This is the idea that we must be in a relationship in order to be happy, as well as our excessive need to hold on to that person once we get him or her. Couples often become dependent upon each other for emotional, psychological, financial, and physical support, and if one of them decides to move on, great pain and suffering results. And when children are involved, things can be even more complex and painful. Fear-based ego needs external support and validation to feel safe and needed, and losing a loved one strikes at the very heart of self. The need to hold on to our partner is the root of all jealousy, can also lead to strong feelings of possessiveness and resulting suffocation. Couples meet and marry at young ages, but then they each mature and change. Without a mutual agenda for the relationship, they're likely to grow apart, and what was once a joyous union becomes a self-limiting burden and a hotbed of resentment, pain, and dispute. The supposed sacred union of marriage can turn into an ego-driven battlefield. All manner of emotional, verbal, physical, and substance abuse takes place, and children are exposed to all of it. They soak it all up in their subconscious minds, thus perpetuating the behaviours into the next generation. This is the picture that often unfolds from our romantic dreams, yet we go out and repeat the same behaviours over and over again. The ego needs that special person in order to complete itself, so we keep looking. We're told that love hurts, and we believe it to be true because it seems to happen to all of us. We never even consider that spirituality might be what we're really craving. The spiritual perspective on relationships is very different from this conventional view. We've seen that spirituality leads us to forgiveness and unconditional love of others and ourselves. We feel comfortable in our own skin and don't need anybody else to make us feel complete. We have all the love we could possibly need inside us already, and are in a position to give love freely without any requirement for it to be returned. we realize the paramount importance of spiritual growth in our lives, and we accept that others may or may not wish to do the same. We see that relationships are an opportunity to learn from each other and to grow together. We focus on what we can put into a relationship rather than what we can get out of it. We seek perfection neither in our partner nor in ourselves. We don't look to constrain or restrict our partner, but take delight in seeing him or her grow and blossom. In loving the other person, we have no attachment to whether he or she may stay with us, and in so doing we ironically make ourselves more desirable. We can talk openly and freely to our partner and be vulnerable because we have no fear of judgment or disapproval. We do not monitor or judge our partner's behavior or growth, but focus on our own. We are free to leave the relationship whenever we wish, and so too is our partner. This unattached attitude to a romantic partnership is the antithesis of what most of us believe to be necessary in a successful couple. Yet from a spiritual perspective, it makes perfect sense. There can be no lasting happiness if we're attached to anything our partner may or may not do. The ego will not be able to accept this, but the spirit will be comfortable with it. The only real agenda in a relationship is mutual healing and growth. Nothing else really matters. The contrast between the conventional view of relationships and the spiritual view is stark. But this is unsurprising when we remember that fear-based ego and unconditional love are the opposite of each other. The ego wants to take, own, manipulate, exploit, restrict, hide, judge, criticize, and nag, yet still be loved. The spirit wants to give, share, allow, assist, reveal, applaud, forgive, heal, and provide unconditional love. These are very different and contrasting agendas. If there are two strong egos in a relationship, clashes are inevitable, and there will always be the potential for major upset and disappointment. The relationship may last, but it will be a struggle, and any sweet moments of togetherness will be overshadowed by ongoing resentment and conflict. If there's one each of ego and spirit in a couple, the spiritual person will still be able to grow as a result of the interactions within the relationship, but the ego person will most likely find it challenging and ultimately unsatisfactory, because the required commitment and mutual understanding will be lacking. The mismatch of beliefs and objectives for the relationship will inevitably lead to a parting of the ways, either emotionally or physically. We potentially hit the romantic jackpot when two spiritual people get together, because now we have a meeting of minds and a joyful opportunity for mutual growth. When two people bring spiritual attributes into a relationship, they will facilitate the best in each other, and both will blossom. Unconditional love and honest communication will allow them to know each other fully and learn from each other without any hesitation or worry. They will both know that the relationship will last for as long as they are both benefiting from it, and the focus will be on the never-ending process of communion with each other. If the relationship stagnates for any reason, both can move on with gratitude for the lessons learned and the experiences shared. This may be disappointing, but it does not have to be the traumatic breakup disaster so many of us repeatedly suffer. It may seem from this description of a spiritual relationship that commitment, marriage and children would be an inadvisable restriction of freedom. This, however, does not have to be the case at all. A marriage between two spiritual people is an agreement to stay together and grow together, come what may. Marriage is not the ultimate fulfillment of romance, but instead a mature and considered decision to continue our spiritual journey within a stable long-term relationship. Marrying in the hope that the other person will settle down and change is not a good plan. Marrying in order to please our partner or our family and friends, or to meet the expectations of society, or to achieve a greater emotional and financial security, is a recipe for regret, bitterness, and resentment, rather than lasting happiness. Marrying just because we are in love with the other person is also not the whole story. Being in love often means seeing perfection in our partner, but this euphoria masks the fact that not one of us is perfect. There's no perfect partner because there's no perfect person. There's a strong temptation to try to make the other person perfect, but really our focus should be on our own learning and growth. Within a spiritual marriage, we significantly improve our chances of happiness, not by seeking to change our partner, but by seeking to change ourselves. Issues may well arise, but these will be the surfacing of old wounds, and a loving partner can help these to heal. Romance still exists within a long-term spiritual marriage, but there's far more depth to it than that. Honest communication and unconditional love are the essential ingredients. All spiritual laws work within the marriage, including the idea of karma. We will receive what we give. Couples who love themselves and each other will light up together and bring light to all those around them. And children born into such a union will grow up in a nurturing and enlightened environment. These things, I now believe, are the real purposes of marriage. Many of these core reasons are lost in the modern focus on the wedding itself and in the legal and financial implications. The core values are all there in the vows that we share, but the danger is that these words are seen as part of the process of getting married, rather than a description of the main purpose. The divorce rate suggests that this is clearly the case, and I am part of these statistics, having married and divorced in ego, and only then becoming spiritually aware. I can honestly say I would not have behaved the way I did had I been aware of these truths. However, I was blind, ignorant, and becoming increasingly desperate, and my basic instinct was to rescue myself at all costs. We live and learn, but we can't turn back the clock. I do feel remorseful at times, but I can't undo what I did. The other obviously important aspect of romantic relationships is the delicate area of our sex lives. I would not claim any credibility in this area either, but what I do now see is the clear distinction between sex and making love. Sexuality is natural, but it's the ego that distorts it into pornography, prostitution, and all other forms of sexual exploitation. As with many things, humankind has taken something beautiful and precious and turned it into a sordid and ugly money-making industry. It's an industry that causes no end of abuse and suffering. When we add in our insecurities, differing sexual appetites and preferences, resulting shame and guilt, and the tendency for men to subconsciously compete with their children for a partner's attention, we have the ingredients for a great deal of unhappiness. Spirituality cuts through all of this grief because the act of making love between two like-minded and committed people is a joyful physical union rather than an ego-based selfish pursuit of pleasure. The key to amazing sex is open and honest communication. Keeping our sexual desires hidden for fear of being judged and rejected is a recipe for deep unhappiness and frustration, and leads to all sorts of dishonest behaviour. There are as many attitudes towards sex as there are human beings on the planet. Yet we're obsessed with pigeonholing people into all manner of categories, none of which mean anything at all. From my perspective, the spiritual approach to life includes every possible variation of sexuality. We are here to express ourselves rather than repress each other. The only caveat would be that the truly spiritual person would never seek to exploit or abuse anyone else for the purpose of self-gratification. In my mind, the purpose of sex is to enjoy intimacy, make love, and occasionally produce offspring. Humankind has made it far more complicated and problematic than it ever needed to be. A further thing to mention about relationships is the impact of breakups. Once the honeymoon period is over and romantic love fades, many relationships are prone to difficulties, and most inevitably come to an end sooner or later. The ones that do survive are either endured in misery or mainly develop along the spiritual lines outlined above. Once we're single again, we remember the good and happy times and tend to forget all of the bad and painful experiences. Consequently, we set out to do it all again, naively expecting a different result. We tend to grieve for the old relationship, forgetting we have learned valuable lessons from it, and that there's no failure in moving on. Some of us remain heartbroken for years, feeling that we've been abandoned and shamed. Time heals, but sometimes it takes a very long time. And old insecurities arise when relationships end, and the ego will want to blame the other person every time, instead of looking inwards to see where the hurt is coming from. Jealousy can leave a bitter taste and cause much suffering. Often we will be guarded in any future relationship for fear of being hurt again. All of these issues arise because of the codependent nature of the failed relationship. Conditional love goes horribly wrong when one half of the couple decides to pursue a different path. Unconditional love will accept that things have run their course and will graciously allow the former partner to thrive elsewhere. Resentment and bitterness from previous relationships eat away inside us and cause us much pain. Forgiveness is the far better option because it then releases us from carrying around all the heavy emotional baggage. If we stay in victim mode and hold on to resentment, all we do is hurt ourselves. Punishing ourselves in order to try to hurt the other person is pretty insane behaviour when seen from a spiritual perspective. A more forgiving and accepting approach towards breakup is yet another benefit of spirituality. It allows us to forgive the past and let go of all the hurt. We may even resume friendships with previous partners and take genuine pleasure in seeing them leading happy lives with someone else. On the other hand, we may not, but as always, we have a choice. The truth is that if anything is still hurting us, that pain is telling us we still have more growing to do. The final benefit of spirituality in respect of relationships is ironically that self-love removes the desperate need to be in a relationship at all. There's nothing wrong with a period of being single where we can focus on our growth and interests. There will be plenty of opportunity down the line for romance, and it's far better to be patient and wait for a suitable person than to latch on to the first person who shows an interest. Being single is actually a great opportunity to really be ourselves. I used to believe that being single would represent a personal failure and produce a sad and lonely existence. but that has not been my experience at all. So, spirituality completely changes our attitude toward relationships, and hence our experience of them. The absolute key is to love ourselves first, so that we're able to give unconditional love to another, whilst remaining internally grounded and stable. We focus on our own growth and take delight in watching our partner grow and flourish. We remain open and honest, give rather than take, make love to each other, respect each other's imperfections and baggage, and give each other complete freedom to express ourselves inside and outside of the relationship. If the relationship does come to an end, it can do so with compassion and forgiveness, and without bitterness or acrimony. If we're single for a while, we can enjoy the experience, rather than continually longing for something different. This may all sound far-fetched, but spirituality changes everything, including relationships. The key to success in love is not to find the best-looking, richest, most suitable and most desirable partner and then desperately cling on to him or her. The better way is to love ourselves and find someone who shares our spiritual beliefs and understands that life is a journey where none of us know what the future holds. Having said that, if a relationship is based on mutual unconditional love, it's clearly far more likely to endure than one based on ego. This is the great paradox of spirituality when it comes to relationships. The idea of the other half is a bit of a misnomer, because each of us is completely whole in our own right. This is the case whether we are in a relationship or not. This is the truth that many do not see, because the ego keeps it from us. It is only when we truly love ourselves that we are then able to give unconditional love to another. The path to a good relationship is therefore for us to become more spiritual. The other half that we are all looking for is actually our own spirit. All we have to do is find it and love it forever. Once we do, then all things are possible.